Hello, Varlets. If the Sith Lord melee Psyker build was all about maximizing damage and aggression, then this Jedi Master version will be the opposite, focusing on defense and being nigh unbreakable. But don't let that fool you. You can still dish out enough damage to one-shot crushers, cleave hordes like you had an actual lightsaber, and be very comfortable right in the thick of things. So let's get it on. When I said this build was the opposite of the Sith Lord, I meant it. This build is going to purposefully break away from the typical Psyker build crafting of maximizing damage by playing at high peril. Instead, we're going to play by maintaining as little peril as possible, letting us access and explore other parts of a Psyker kit beyond raw damage. Now, for our melee weapon, we'll be using the Force Greatsword, but we'll be using the Mark 8 instead. This one is best suited for how we are going to play this build with its easy to access horde clearing capabilities. Stat-wise, ideally you would want one with 31% warp resistance or lower. If you can't get that, then 57% is the next lowest you should go for. We want to make our warp slice cause a ton of peril for this build. For perks, we'll take carapace damage for Crushers, Maulers and the Twins, and we'll also take Maniac damage to bring down Dreg Ragers and Mutants as quickly as possible. For blessings, we're going to take Shred because this build, even more so than the Sith Lord, is going to be playing with crits a lot more, so Shred is going to be invaluable for us. We'll also take Wrath for the 200% cleave, which lets us cut through hordes and melee peasant enemies like a lightsaber through butter. For our ranged weapons, we're going to need something quick firing with a high critical rate, something we can whip out on the fly and dish out a lot of damage. So to that end, we are actually going to take the Electro Staff for this build. This will serve as our main way to deal with faraway shooters, gunners and reapers, but it also serves as a utility tool for dealing with bulwarks and ragers, stunning and staggering them when need be. We'll take Flag and Maniac damage for shooters and specials as well as Surge and Warp Nexus. I know I said this build doesn't use any of the peril-reactive talents or blessings, but Warp Nexus is the only exception for this build. We'll talk more about our ranged weapons later in the video. For Curios, I'm going with my usual 2 toughness 1 health, perk-wise will be 3 toughness, 3 combat ability regeneration and 3 stamina regen. Now, moving on to our talent selection, because we're approaching this melee Psyker build differently from the usual, we can explore how to integrate more defense and utility to set us apart from the Sith Lord. This build opens with the expected warp expenditure and perfect timing, staples for a melee build that has plenty of crit. We'll take Soul Stealer for warp kills, giving us the ability to restore toughness on any warp kill, and we'll also take Quietude for some synergy with other parts of the build, which I'll also explain later. We will also be taking Smite for this build and both the supporting nodes, Charge Strike and Enfeeble. Charge Strike gives heavy attacks a strong damage over time effect, while Enfeeble not only debuffs enemies hit, but also improves the effectiveness of Charge Strike as well. Enemies killed by the damage over time effect from Charge Strike do 3 things. Number 1, it helps build up charge for your Warp Slice on your Force Greatsword. Number 2, the damage over time effect counts as a warp kill, so if an enemy dies to it, it triggers Soul Stealer on each enemy killed this way. Since it counts as a warp kill, it also helps to build up and support the regular damage buff from Malefic Momentum without actually having to switch to Smite, use your staff or even the Warp Slice. In return, kills with your regular sword attacks also help buff up the damage over time effects of Charge Strike too, creating a sort of feedback loop. Lightning Speed is core for the added attack speed, and by Crack of Bone is the key node that separates us from the Sith Lord build. Having this node means we'll never be able to hold a high level of peril for very long at all, hindering all peril-reactive talents and blessings. But we will use this to our advantage. Moving on, we'll take Prescience for the added crit, and we are going to invest a lot in this cluster of talent nodes here. Empathetic Evasion lets us be practically immune to range gunfire while we score crits, and Anticipation gives us a little more mobility and evasion. Psykinetics Aura is a staple in all builds for cooldown reduction while battling elites and specials. Just a Dream provides us with a massive 25% damage resistance against both toughness and health damage by diverting it into our peril. Since we're always going to be quelling peril through by Crack of Bone, we'll also turn some of this peril taken back into toughness through Quietude. Having this defensive talent alone is what lets us tank a Crusher overhit while on full toughness in Damnation and Auric, and substantially neutralizes the damage from Maulers too. You'll still die from an overhit in Havoc because the corruption damage will probably eat through your wound anyway, so still don't get hit. Our combat ability will be Scryer's Gaze going into Warp Unbound through Precognition. Now, people often associate Scryer's Gaze with high peril gameplay because it generates a lot of peril, but in reality, Scryer's Gaze actually doesn't care if you have high peril or not. None of its benefits need you to be at high peril, only that you have peril to spare to keep it going. And that's exactly what this build aims to do. Because of By Crack of Bone and having a strong cleave, you can very easily maintain low peril while having Scryer's Gaze active. This lets you take advantage of the bunch of buffs that are only available when Scry's Gaze is building up peril, making this build pretty difficult to bring down and provides a sizable damage boost as long as you can maintain this buff. The rest of the talent points will go into Vulnerable Mind and Disrupt Destiny, which will be our main source of damage through Perfectionism. You should be able to maintain about 20 stacks or so on average throughout your mission, and Cruel Fortune makes building and maintaining it an easy job as long as you go for the head. This build is fairly straightforward to play, even more so than the Sith Lord, I think. Because of our high defense and strong cleaving power, you'll want to be in the front lines, holding back hordes of melee enemies and poxwalkers. Given that you'll be building up warp slice charges very quickly, use them often to wipe out chaff in the mixed horde. Against poxwalkers and small groups of enemies, use a combo of heavy and light attacks to create a looping chain of horizontal slashes that applies charge strikes consistently. Against elites like Crushers, Maulers, and Scab Rages, you can open an engagement with a push attack which causes your next heavy attack to be a thrust, letting you deal heavy damage from the start. This then chains into a constant loop of overhead heavy attacks which will apply enfeeble and charge strike damage. Use your force push to stagger Crushers and Rages out of their attack to buy space and counterattack as needed. Use Scry's Gaze whenever you feel there are enough enemies to justify activating it. The more enemies you are going to deal with, the better, since you can maintain the buff from Scry's Gaze easily. Because of your low peril nature, this build can be played a little bit like the veteran's weapon specialist, swapping between melee combat and your Electro Staff. Your Electro Staff actually has a pretty strong stagger when it crits, so often I like to spam the Void Bolt attack at incoming rages because it staggers them out of their attacks and breaks up their advance a little. You can, of course, use it like a regular Electro Staff to deal with ranged enemies too. An alternative option here is to take a Trauma Staff instead, giving incredible crowd control power against Crushers and Rages and makes dealing with Bulwarks a whole lot easier. You just trade off some of your range potential instead. Your boss damage isn't going to be as impressive as the Sith Lord, but you can definitely help your team by damaging it with heavy attacks to apply Enfeeble, causing it to take a 10% extra damage from everyone else. I don't know if you've noticed, but this build also has the broken combo of Smite and Warp Unbound built in. So if things are going south, you can always activate Scry's Gaze and Smite to electrocute and stunlock enemies for 12 seconds or so. If managing a monster and a horde is becoming too much for you, then this will be a good time to tap into this combo to stabilize the situation. Use this as a last resort since you won't be doing much damage with it. Lastly, here are a couple of pretty useful tips and tricks for making the most of this build. Tip number 1. Emergency Regeneration. The reason why I wanted 31% warp resistance for my Force Greatsword is so that its peril cost would be 50%. This means, with Quietude, activating your special attack would recover around 20% of your toughness instantly. Quelling the peril built up as a result also means you can manually recover another 20% of toughness if there's no other way to regenerate. Pair this with dodge sliding and you'll find that you are rarely without any toughness at all. Tip number 2. Empathetic Advance. If you ever need to close the gap between range enemies, what I like to do is spam the Void Bolts from the Electro Staff to not just suppress them, but to also activate Empathetic Evasion and then walk towards them, menacingly. Shooters and gunners will try to stop you, but all their gunfire is meaningless. As soon as you get close enough, switch to melee and force all of them into melee as well. You'll take them down easily. The peril that you build up doing this also acts as sort of a lifesteal buffer since by Crack of Bone now has something to quell which also triggers Quietude. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. I really enjoyed putting this build together and exploring just how much defensive capabilities you can squeeze into it while being able to maintain respectable damage on your own. Personally, I enjoyed this build much more than the Sith Lord because it's more mechanically interesting. There's so much you can do as a Jedi Master Psyker beyond just raw damage output. I really love having a lot of utility woven into my builds, and this is one of those builds which has it in buckets. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.